Welcome to the Spaces Net Carbon Zero podcast. I'm Alex G. As part of the Spaces year of Net Carbon Zero events, we're going to be talking to 4 leading thinkers and practitioners, finding out just how they found themselves to be in this field, why the work they do is so important, and fundamentally, what do we need to do to support the drive to net carbon zero? Today, we're talking to Marina Robertson, a senior director at the NPS Group with responsibility for NPS Consulting, delivering advisory services, including climate and carbon solutions to the public sector. Marina, you've had an interesting journey from sunnier climes, hailing originally from Athens. You have a degree in environmental studies, a master's in environmental management, and you're currently undertaking an MBA, as if the world hasn't got enough for you in store. Throughout your career, you've led public sector services such as transformation, property, capital delivery, economic growth, housing, regeneration, working on some of the most notable schemes, including New Wembley Stadium and the Olympic legacy. Marina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's lovely to be here. Thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction as well.
You are very welcome. I suppose fundamentally, the first thing I'm interested in, and particularly because we're focusing on net carbon zero, you've got a unique perspective looking at how environmental issues are perhaps managed overseas, and certainly from hailing from Greece to what we're doing here. What do you think are the fundamental differences in our approach, and is one better?
There are no fundamental differences in the approach. I think everyone means well. Politicians kind of mean well in terms of getting the people that vote for them to support their policies. Governments mean well in setting out the strategies. International organizations mean well in setting out frameworks and policies. And you and I mean well in terms of trying to make sense of that big system we're all operating in, and try to, on a day-to-day basis, make small bits of impact happen in the localities where we work. And I think everyone working in the public sector, and consultancy for that matter, is in the same boat. No fundamental differences. I actually did my first degree, as you said, in environmental studies. That was back in 1992. I started that was the Rio conference. It was only 5 years since the Brundtland Commission defined the notion of sustainable development in 1987. So it was a very exciting time for the world. And that's what excited me starting that at the time. Over the last 20 years, it was very difficult to find a job in the field, however. But I am delighted, like many other people, that have a strong connection to the value around decarbonization. It is absolutely brilliant what we're seeing, this resurgence of a low carbon economy. It's still a very long way to go, but nevertheless, we're on a really good path.
And I guess it's interesting in that time, since the sort of mid-90s to now, to see how much of an industry the environmental sector has become, and how powerful an industry it has become. As you say, when you come out with a degree and thinking the world is in front of you, and finding out that actually there's not a lot going on industry-wise to enable you to develop a career straight into that path. How, I suppose the question would be, you are coming full circle, right?
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. I have to upskill myself again. I got straight out of university. I was lucky enough to get a job in the field, so to speak, in terms of regeneration and planning. And I have managed to operate in that field for a while. So always having a bit of an eye on climate issues and how those affect, but very little control really on making any real impacts. And I'm sure many people feel that way as well.
I think you're probably right, and impact is really important. So with that in mind, talk us through a little bit of perhaps some of the challenges that you faced, certainly around those environmental issues, and what sort of impacts you've been able to have throughout your career. As we noted in the introduction, your career spans a wealth of different aspects of public sector services. So talk us through perhaps some of those issues.
The key thing to say here is that sustainability is not just about the environment. It's about sustaining a society, and the climate is part of that. So in the wider sense, quite a lot of what all of us do has something to do with sustainability, which is this idea of making sure that future generations receive at least the same environment that we were able to receive. That's really the point of this, whether that's climate or society, so that we look to make things better from generation to generation. Some of the ways, I have worked in political environments quite a bit of my career, so working with some really inspiring politicians that have vision around sustainability, and to have pursued that vision despite the whole world not being very interested, actually has been very inspiring to me. In terms of planning, creating spaces where we reduce air pollution by pedestrianization, or by reducing traffic, or by cycle lanes, all of that stuff, it all contributes to people's experience of the environment, and creates a bit of an appetite for a greener world. In terms of the economy, we have seen the last few years this circular economy merging, and it is no longer, it used to be something hippies did, or people that studied environmental studies in the 90s for quite a few years, but now we see that being mainstreamed, and in terms of the local economy, linked to local economic initiatives around shopping local, accessing local, spending the local pound with the local businesses, the health of the high streets. It is really, when you think about it in that way, it is really easy to see how quite a lot of the work we do in the built environment sector actually all contributes towards sustainability, and this will to not have our climate change because of the impact we make.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. And it's really interesting to hear your thoughts about how all of those aspects of those services really are delivering one holistic vision around sustainability. So that was really fascinating. Thank you. Along the way, what do you think the most important lesson you've learned is?
Collaboration. For me, it is really key, and working with each other, and actually having a common goal, and having a culture where we continually learn. I think what we are seeing at the moment in the marketplace and academically in terms of technology is quite a lot of products in the marketplace that they do not have a position in terms of how they affect the wider system. So it is really important that we collaborate and create thought processes that are end to end in terms of environment and sustainability, and not just in terms of solving one problem there and then creating 10 down the line. So that inclusion of all the elements of something we're working on, our work is really, really important, because we want sustained change rather than one-off change that actually, or one-off technologies that is surpassed in the next few months, a boiler, and then suddenly 10 years later there's a heat source pump they need, and they spend lots of money on the heat source pump, and they borrow to make those changes. And then so working all together, academia, technologists, climate experts, and property and planning professionals as one to find solutions that, I'll use your words, that are quite holistic about the future.
Thank you. And just thinking about then the work that you do working across public sector organizations, how do you know where to start with some of the challenges your clients are facing? And what kind of challenges are they coming to you with?
The key thing in terms of the key thing as a consultant, and although we are owned by the public sector, NPS Group, our job is to consult, to give advice to local authorities. It's an advisory capacity, is to put ourselves in their shoes and the kind of pressures they're under. Chief executives and directors of finance and corporate directors have so many conflicting priorities. And climate is one of those, but they have children in care, they have people in temporary accommodation, in housing that is not decent. So for me, it is very much about understanding all the different types of pressures that especially local authorities are under at this moment in time, and being able to find solutions that actually make some of these things easier for them, rather than actually pursuing solutions that meet one objective, but actually create problems for them in other areas. Again, that idea of holism, really, in looking at the problem is really key for us going forward.
And I suppose that plays back to the, sorry, I suppose that plays back to the point you made previously around bringing together those component parts of knowledge, whether that's academia, science, engineering, consultancy, public sector, finances, etc., and pulling all of those things together to be working as one, as opposed to working as smaller entities, perhaps competing objectives against one another.
Yeah, and local authorities are political organizations, and if we're honest with each other, they need long-term plans, but they also need short-term plans. And sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones. So, for example, working with highways departments to consider what kind of solutions can be identified there in terms of reducing carbon, or working with public planning departments to create policies around fuel poverty and the links between fuel poverty and climate change. And although some solutions may be ideal for climate change, they may not solve the problem of fuel poverty. And we see this actually coming out of research in terms of the heat source pumps. They may be the right solution for the environment, but they end up being extremely expensive. And we were talking to some colleagues yesterday, in fact, and they were saying that they will actually wait to see the price of heat source pumps reduce before they consider applying them to their estate, because the economic risk of applying that solution in a state of 1,000 homes is just far too high to be able to take.
That's really interesting. That's an interesting strategy, and one that is going to be very challenging to deliver against a time frame of 2030 if we're waiting for the prices to drop before it becomes sustainable enough to invest. I suppose just moving the conversation forward a little bit, and to the sort of audience of Spaces who are really custodians of our public spaces and buildings. What do you think we need to do differently to achieve carbon net zero?
I think I will go back to an earlier point. We need to involve more people and work closely with other organizations and take advantage of all the resources available to our locality to be able to take forward some of those solutions. And I'll go back to the earlier conversation we had regarding the economics of it. It is really important to consider the investment cost and the result and consider whole life costings. And in fact, local authorities, because they have more longer term business plans, they're able to forecast returns in a longer period of time, which is a little bit more, it is a little bit easier to justify that investment rather than having a period of a 5-year return. And the point you made about 2030 is absolutely right. That is really the economic trade-off, isn't it? So what does an organization do? Go bankrupt or meet the 2030 deadline? And that is the ethical dilemma. Quite a lot of boards are facing, and management teams and leadership teams and cabinets up and down the country, both in terms of the public sector, but also housing associations, RPs.
Absolutely. And it's going to be a very interesting discussion over the next few months, few years around how we access capital investment funds. And do we do that in the traditional sense, or do we find innovative ways of attracting funding that allows us to invest in our buildings? It's one to certainly keep an eye on. I think finally, Marina, if I may, what sort of one piece of literature, article, documentary, what was the one thing that's kind of inspired you that you would like to pass on to our audience that's going to totally revolutionize their thinking on carbon reduction?
I don't know if I've got anything that would revolutionize anyone's thinking, but there are a couple of bits. I am a big fan of Noam Chomsky, the philosopher. And recently he got together with Robert Paulin, an economist. I think he's an economist in MIT. And they've produced this book called Climate Crisis and the Global Green New Deal. And it is a book, I was very lucky to be able to attend the masterclass they both gave. So although to just have them on the screen talking about these things, I was fangirling. So it was really brilliant to be able to be there and listen to that. But two key points really I took away from that. The first one, Noam Chomsky made, and what he said is, whether we believe in climate change or not, we're running out of fossil fuels. So we have no choice but to make these changes. So even if one doesn't believe in climate change as a trigger to make those necessary adjustments to be able to meet those targets that the government and local authorities have set up in different organizations, they need to do it because the world is running out of fossil fuels. And that is quite powerful, I think, and a completely and a simple but really effective way of seeing the kind of challenge we're facing. The second point that was made by Robert Paulin was around jobs, green jobs, and actually paying green jobs similar levels to fossil fuel jobs. And actually having that disparity in pay, a chief executive of a green initiative is not getting the same reward as a chief executive of a fossil fuel company. And unless we start thinking about how these rewards work in the green economy, we will always be plan B. And I think those two elements for me were really powerful. So it's I've got a book here. It came with the master class, but I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. I thought that was quite interesting. I really love because when you've been in the sector for such a long time, I really love finding ways to describe things that are really simple and effective, and that has made a big change in the way I think about things.
And I think those, I think you make a really valid point. Those economic triggers, which will attract not just the science and the technologies that are going to give us a greener future, but attract the workforce to mobilize themselves. So you can join up your value-based aspirations with your financial-based aspirations, are certainly going to make a big dent in the marketplace in which we're trying to tackle. Marina, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, and we look forward to seeing you at the roundtable discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. I'm looking forward to it very much as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina.